So the first question is, should you attend the APA convention or not? And this is completely dictated by what your professional goals are. So if your goal is to get into a PhD or PsyD in counseling or clinical psychology, then going to the APA convention may be helpful. But there are also other venues you can go to network with people and practice presenting research. And of course, these research experiences are more important for PhD programs than PsyD programs. So why would you go to the APA convention versus more local or alternative conventions? The APA convention is good if you're going to be applying to programs across the country and therefore want to be able to connect with people from a wide variety of programs across the country. However, it's more expensive generally to go and stay at APA than it is other conventions, and APA has more people and it's more intimidating to try and connect with people because there's so much hustle and bustle. Alternative smaller conferences are things like the Great Lakes Counseling Psychology Conference, the National Multicultural Conference and Summit, the Midwestern Psychological Association Annual Conference, the Teachers College Annual Winter Roundtable on Cultural Psychology and Education, and each state's own state psychological association conference that tends to happen each year. So there are a bunch of conferences that exist, and I haven't even named some thematic conferences around certain research topics that people across disciplines and psychological specialties may attend. So there are lots of conferences, and you need to decide if maybe going to one of these easier, smaller conferences is better than going to APA. In terms of goals, there are a few goals you may have for wanting to go to APA that will dictate how you spend your time at the convention. And it's very important to know what your goals are because it will drastically change things. You might have a goal of getting to know graduate students. Graduate students are people who can become your friends long-term and colleagues and people you talk with regularly over the course of your academic life. They can just be cool people you get to hang out with once a year when you come to the APA convention. That's the case for me. There's a lot of people I only get to see once a year at the convention, and it's so much fun to hang out with them, and that works for us. Graduate students, especially older graduate students, can become mentors to help you, especially if you're earlier in your own academic career. Graduate students can also facilitate your connection with professors in their network, whether it's their major professor or professors in their program or other folks that they know. So they're also a gateway to expanding your network. Another goal might be getting to know professors directly. That can be helpful because you can develop mentorships with certain professors who will help you with applying to doctoral programs or advise you on research or help you deal with work-life balance or whatever it is. When you get to know professors, if they're going to be at the programs you're applying to, then you can put a face to your application. When they get your application, they'll remind themselves, oh yeah, I met this person and I had a good impression of them. I'm more likely to rate their application higher. I'm more likely to invite them to an interview. So making a good first impression at the convention helps your application sometimes be more competitive than other applications. So that is extremely worthwhile in terms of networking. It also opens the door to potential research collaborations with that professor, particularly further down the line once you become more independent in your research abilities. So many good reasons to get to know professors, as they are the ultimate gatekeepers to whether or not you might get into their doctoral program. Also, later in your career, once you're successfully become a PhD or a PsyD student, and we'll focus on clinical and counseling psychology as the most likely programs for the purposes of our videos here. In that case, you're going to want to get to know pre-doctoral internship training directors. These are the folks who are in charge of the internship programs at the various agencies across the country that participate in the match, which at the end of your career, you apply to a bunch of agencies where the next year you would be working for 40 hours a week as a full-time psychologist working at that agency. That's the capstone experience, besides the dissertation, of doing a doctorate in counseling or clinical psychology. And so if that's the case, again, putting a face to the name when you meet with training directors can be very helpful, as it may make them more prone to giving you an interview and elevating your application. Also, going to the conference is helpful because it will help you see how people present and articulate their research. This modeling can be very helpful for you to see examples of how people describe their research and present it. And the quality of how people present their research varies, just like with anything, but there are some really strong presenters that you can learn a lot from. So that can be a goal as well. Knowing your goals helps you figure out if it's worth it to go to APA or not, because it is more time consuming and more expensive. So figure out, of those goals that I mentioned, or maybe others I didn't, what are your big goals, and are they better served by going to a more local or regional conference rather than a national conference? Because if you're only applying, for example, to a few programs that are in a clustered geographic area, maybe a lot of those professors just tend to go to the regional conferences. It just really depends. Though I will say, if they're serious researchers, a lot of the times they will prioritize going to the national APA convention instead of regional and local conventions, because they only have so much money and so much time, so they'll tend to prioritize those conferences that are most important to them. And scholars, particularly those at heavier research-intensive schools like at state universities, oftentimes prioritize APA. So, got to know your goals. That will dictate whether you go or not. And in other videos, I'll be explaining some of the other logistical advice and considerations that can help shape whether APA is worth it to go or not. So, if you're an undergraduate or a master's student, and your primary goal is to help you get into a doctoral program, here's a few things you need to know. First, you need to know what your research area of interest is. Are you interested in men and masculinity, eating disorders, trauma, whatever it is? Because if you don't know this, the American Psychological Association is composed of many divisions. Like Division 12 is the Society of Clinical Psychology. Division 17 is the Society of Counseling Psychology. Division 36 is the Psychology of Religion and Spirituality. Division 19 is the Society of Military Psychology. Division 51 is the Psychology of Men and Masculinity. So different research topical areas oftentimes have their own division. Likewise, specialty areas of psychology, that would be counseling, clinical, school, social, cognitive, etc. These are all called psychological specialties. These specialties tend to have their own division as well. I mentioned D12 and D17, for example. So you're going to want to go to the programming at the convention that's sponsored by those divisions that are aligned with your research interests and your psychological specialty areas. So if you're applying to a bunch of counseling psych programs, you're going to want to go to D17 events. If you're applying to a bunch of clinical psych programs, you're going to want to go to a bunch of D12 events. If your topical research interest is in the psychology of men and masculinity, you're going to want to go to a lot of D51 events. Okay? So it's helpful to figure out what your main research interests and specialty areas are first, and then you're going to go to those relevant divisions programming. And not only, and I should say that at the APA convention, APA itself, the larger entity and organization, sponsors a bunch of things. APAGS, which is the graduate student only arm of APA, sponsors a bunch of things. But then most of the programming is coordinated and the responsibility of the divisions. So that's why we're so division-centric in terms of thinking about what do I attend when I go to the APA convention. And not only are there divisions, some of the bigger divisions have sections or subgroups within them, and they may be responsible for their own particular slices of programming. So for example, the Society of Counseling Psych, which is Division 17, has a number of sections, including the section for the advancement of women, section on supervision and training, section on prevention science, bunch of sections. And so you may want to go to some of their programming. And a lot of times section programming, because it's a smaller group, a lot of times their programming will be unofficial. It will be off the official APA convention program booklet. It will not be listed on the app for the APA convention that APA puts out every year. And so you may have to go to that division's website and to that section's sub-website to download a PDF of that section's off the books or informal discussion that may be happening in their hospitality suite, which is a room they rent every day of the convention to host some of that section's programming. So you want to be aware not only of formal but informal programming. We'll talk more about that in a later video, however. Also, another thing you need to know in advance is you want to know ideally some of the programs you may be applying to, some of the professors at those programs who you may be wanting to work under, which is particularly relevant in the case of most PhDs, where most of them work under a mentorship model where you're applying to work with a specific professor around her or his specific research interests. I'm not going to go into great detail on that because I cover that in my other videos, like the How to Get into a Counseling Psychology PhD program. That video series covers a lot of this, so I'm not going to repeat myself. So it's good to know what programs and what faculty members of those programs you're wanting to meet at the APA convention, because then you can try and go to that programming where they're likely to be. And sometimes if they're presenting, their names are going to be listed in the index of presenting authors. And so you can actually look up the professors you're interested in to see if they're presenting at APA. And if they are, it'll tell you where and when and what they're presenting. So you can make a point of going to that thing and watching them, which will give you a chance to connect with them. So it's good to go to those events and programming things at APA where the graduate students and the faculty of that program will be, because that makes it more likely that you get to network and connect with them. All right, so in the next video, we're going to be talking about what types of programming to attend in order to connect with people, and what is the approach or the tips that you want to bear in mind when you're trying to connect with people at these various types of programming. So, okay, in a bit. So the next thing to figure out is, what is my strategy for the different types of programming to go to at APA, and how am I supposed to conduct myself when I'm in these specific types of events at APA? So, first of all, if you're going to a symposium, that's when there is an audience, anywhere between 20 to 500 people, just really depends on how popular it is and the size of the room. You go to a symposium where there are multiple speakers who each get a chunk of time to talk about their project or piece that's related to an overall theme. So you may have a symposium on modern best practices in psychological measurement, or a symposium on the role of spirituality in recovering from trauma. And then the 3 to 5 speakers typically will all be presenting separate papers that are related to that larger theme. And so these can be multiple professors or graduate students from different or the same research team or across institutions who are coming together to talk about a given thing. And then sometimes there's a chair or a discussant who will bring things together, who will wrap up and conclude and reflect on these topics discussed. And sometimes there's some brief Q&A at the end, though oftentimes people don't manage their time as well as they want, and so there's very little time for questions at the end. So if you're going to a symposium, and you may want to because there may be people in the audience, or more likely, people who are presenting as a part of the symposium, and you can look up their names, there may be people who are graduate students or professors who you'd like to be able to connect with and have them get to know you. And so if you go to a symposium, it's very limited because they're going to be busy up front presenting, everybody's going to be busy being quiet listening. Usually there are some rare exceptions to that sort of style of presentation. And then at 10 till, or if they're running a little late, which they usually are, and at 5 till the hour, they will stop. There may be some Q&A, which you might be able to raise your hand and ask a question, but when that finishes up, the presentations are supposed to stop sharply at 10 till so that people can walk to their next thing. But what will happen is the presenters will start, after they say thank you and everybody claps and folks start walking out, people who want to connect with the presenters will walk up to the front of the room and try and engage in some small talk or congratulate them on their presentation or express appreciation for the work that they're doing or whatever, or try and give them their business card and strike up a conversation. That happens. So if you're wanting to connect with one of the presenters up there, you're going to have to balance that with the other people trying to talk with the presenters, because there's several people wanting the presenters' attention, and so it can feel uncomfortable competing for space and attention. And presenters are typically trying to throw stuff in their bags and get out of the room and get to the next thing they have to go to, and so they're distracted, they're in a rush, they may not feel comfortable having a conversation with people or answering questions, or they may wish at least to go out into the hallway and get out of the way of the next presenters coming up. So what you don't want to do is go up to the front of the room and start trying to have a deep conversation with somebody when it's clear that they're trying to get out of the way of the next presenters, they're trying to move on to their next thing, and there's this person who's trying to pester them with questions, right? You don't want to be that person. So you have to read the situation and watch what other people are doing, and this requires a lot of body language reading. So you read their nonverbals and you read their paraverbals, which is how they say what they're saying. Are they being curt in their responses? Are they receptive? Are they interested in dialoguing with you, or do they seem dismissive? You got to pick up on that stuff, because that will dictate how you approach the conversation. And so if you're wanting to connect with them, it might be something as simple as, hey, Dr. X, I really appreciated your presentation. I've been reading your work and it's really interesting to me, and I'd love to be able to talk more about it later. You know, so you kind of introduce yourself, express your interest, they get to see your face, and you let them go, right? You're not putting your hooks in them and forcing them to talk with you. So you're kind of setting yourself up for hopefully running into them later where you can have a substantive conversation, or you're at least opening a door so that if they're so inclined, they could say, oh yeah, well, we could talk more or meet up later, or we could talk in the hallway, or will I see you at the Division 17 social hour later? Okay, great, I'll see you then. You know, it gives them a chance. So you can open a door and be brief about it. Okay, so it's kind of limited when it comes to the end of symposia. It's a difficult, high-pressure time to try and connect with people. One of the best places to connect with people, my favorite, are the poster sessions. And this is when a bunch of people, it can be anywhere from 20 to 200 posters, will be up on bulletin boards in the large convention space at the convention center. So they'll have this large exhibit hall where there's all these exhibitors hawking their wares, and so you make your way through them to the poster session section, where it's these rows upon rows of easels where people have put their 3-foot by 5-foot posters up using thumbtacks and will stand by their poster. And it's these long rows, and so the people doing the posters are standing by their posters, smiling at passerby, and engaging people who stop by their poster to read it in discussion and answering questions that they have. So poster sessions are great because there's no pressure, the speaker has nowhere to go, so they're just standing by their poster session hanging out. Some posters are going to be really popular and some are not, so some people will be busy dialoguing with people and answering questions about the study that's described on that poster. Some people will be bored out of their minds because they have nobody to talk to. So it gives you a chance to walk around at your own pace. You have to go to that section of the poster session where that division is holding their stuff, because when there's poster sessions happening, usually several divisions are doing their posters at once. So on this row over here, you've got D17 people. On this row, you've got D12 people. And on this row, you've got Division 51 people doing this. So there's a lot of them happening at once. So you want to go to that row of posters that pertains to the division of interest to you, the topics of interest, right? And then you slowly walk up and down the posters, checking out posters as you walk along, and you stop by and chat with people at those posters that are of interest. So again, if you know there's going to be some presenters who are going to be at a given poster session, so professors or graduate students who you'd like to connect with, You look them up in the directory and see, oh, they're presenting at this poster session on this day at this time. Then you go to that poster session and you go seek them out. And so you can stop by their poster, and you can just read their poster first and kind of smile and acknowledge their presence if you want. You can say, hey, I'm so-and-so. It's nice to meet you, Dr. X, or whatever it is. They might say, hey, let me know if you have any questions about the poster, at which point a lot of people will say, well, yeah, give me the overview of it. So a lot of times the poster's got a lot of words on it, and someone will walk up and just want a Cliff Notes version of the poster. And so usually, unless the person's super busy, they are going to be very happy to give you a 1 minute to 5 minute overview of what they did in the study that's being described in the poster. So there's a bunch of different ways to kind of initiate conversation. But when I was a student, and what I generally recommend is, if there's a professor standing at a poster you want to meet, then you say, hi, so-and-so, my name is Joe Hammer. I'm at the University of Illinois as a bachelor's student or a master's student, and I was looking forward to coming by and checking out your poster today, as I've enjoyed reading your work up to this point and really find myself interested in the barriers to seeking help, and I'm really excited to learn more about this study here. And then they respond how they respond, and you can ask them for an overview, or you can read it and ask pertinent questions. But your big goal is you're introducing yourself, letting them know what institution you're coming from, because that's just kind of standard stuff that you tell somebody. And then you're letting them know that you kind of know who they are, and that you signal some seriousness and some dedication by mentioning that you've read some of their work, and if you can name something specific, that's nice. You don't want to be a try-hard. You don't want to try to overly impress. You don't want to try and come across as super competent or claim that you've read all their stuff, because I guarantee you haven't. But you want to just kind of be cool, at ease, not try-harding, but just finding a way to show them that you follow their work and find their work really interesting, and maybe you have a way to sprinkle in the fact that you're interested in the area or ideas you have. There's an art to it, and it takes some time to learn and find your own words for it. But we'll be talking more about the nuts and bolts of having those conversations later. But suffice it to say, poster sessions are a wonderful place to have those conversations, because people are standing around hanging out, and it's only towards the end of the poster session where people are getting antsy and might be furling up their poster and trying to get out of there, and so you don't want to be in their hair. But as long as you're not hogging the airtime from other people who are stopping by, because you can always be talking with a professor or a graduate student, and be mindful of when other people walk up to the poster. So stand off to the side a little bit and say, oh, hey, go ahead. If they look at the other person and it's clear they want to acknowledge the other person's presence or give them an intro. So, don't hog. Be mindful of when other people want the presenter's time, and you can come back around to speak with them later, or just stand off to the side while the professor answers that new person's questions, and then the professor can return to your conversation. It requires reading the mood of the situation, getting a feel for how things are flowing. And so you can read that. So poster sessions are really good, and some things to know as well is whatever they're presenting on now is still fresh in their heads, and that's good. But don't remember that when people start a research project, it takes many years until it's published, and so the stuff that's just coming out in print for me that I've published was stuff I worked on 2 years ago, and I may not remember that much about the study. So generally, don't ask people specific questions and nitpicky questions and really specific stuff about stuff they did in the past, because they might not remember it so well. I find it's more interesting when I'm a professor and someone asks me about the current poster that I'm presenting on, or what I'm currently working on besides this project, or stuff that's coming up that I'm excited about, future research, directions I'm going, because that's the stuff I spend a lot of time thinking about, is what's happening now and in the future, not some of the past stuff. So sometimes it's appropriate to talk about past studies, but usually not at a great level of detail. And that's something you'll feel out over time as you get better at this stuff. Is there anything else? Yeah, you want to make sure when you're asking them about their work, you want to come across in the right way. You know, you don't want to do anything, you don't want to do rapid 20 questions, you don't want to be grilling them, you don't want to be interrogating themselves. Asking questions in such a way that it's seeming like you're wanting them to prove themselves or justify what they did. You know, don't be that person. So you want to be curious and interested and warm and friendly and just genuinely open and interested in learning. You don't want to come in at a place of critique or trying to sound smart or competent or, oh, what about this limitation, and other stuff like that, because it's gonna feel like an attack. So you have to be very diplomatic in conversations that you have. So that is some advice for poster sessions. But otherwise, love poster sessions. Go to as many as you can when you're going to get to interact with relevant folks, because it's just a wonderful. The next type of programming that I'm also a big fan of, particularly if you are a newer student with less experience, is the unofficial division and section programming, which is often held at the local area hotels or other venues. So this is stuff that's not officially held in the APA convention booklet or the APA convention app. It's stuff that's unofficial programming that's controlled by that division or section that they'll post messages on the listserv to their members about existing. So they'll say, hey members, we're doing these unofficial things on these days and these times and these places on these topics, come and hang out. It's not in the official program, but it's happening. Here's a PDF of our unofficial schedule. So you have to actually go to the websites of these divisions or the sections within the divisions, find those schedules, look over what stuff is happening when, and then consider adding some of those things to your schedule. Because the cool thing about this unofficial programming is that it's generally less well attended. There are fewer people. The topics may sometimes be more niche. So because there are fewer people interested, you're going to have a smaller draw of people, and that's why they can't get it in the official program, because there's just not going to be enough interest. It's not general audience enough. So there can be some really cool niche things that you can go to and meet other people that are really interested in that little corner of the research universe like yours. So you can make some really good connections with people who are really relevant to your professional development, both graduate students and professors. And because it's a smaller setting, it's more informal, it's more intimate, it's oftentimes easier to connect with people because there's fewer people they're trying to run into and talk with, smaller setting, more introvert friendly. Just the downside is that sometimes some of these events can be a dud, they're not well attended, you may show up and it ends up feeling like a waste of your time, it may not be as organized, it just really depends. So you go in with no strong expectation, but sometimes you can really hit a gold mine, and it's a good place to find community and align with people who share your specific niche areas. So definitely strongly recommend that unofficial programming, but you got to do your legwork to find out what stuff is happening where and when. Okay, the next flavor of programming is social hours. So this is, every division has a social hour, I think, with maybe rare exception. Some of them have multiple social hours. So Division 17 has a Thursday evening social hour / poster session that's co-sponsored by CCPTP, and then they'll have a social hour after the business meeting on Saturday late afternoon. So that's always the case. And so these social hours are a great place to see a lot of people related to that division all at once. So it can be, depending on the size of the division, it can be a small room of 20 or 30 people to something like Division 17, where you have literally hundreds of people in this big, 3 basketball-sized court room, like a really big room. If you go on Division 17's website and look through some of the photos posted to the APA conventions, you can get a sense of the size of the social hours. Maybe I'll put a link to that in the description of the video. So Social hours can be a lot of fun, and they can also be some of the scariest places to be. Because there are a ton of people, and what's happening for older students and professors is they're going there because it's a reunion. So they're keeping an eye out for people they haven't seen in a while. And so they're looking around, looking to run into the folks they know and like, to catch up and chat and drink alcoholic beverages with and shoot the stuff and all of that. So some people are also there specifically for networking, like you might be, but a lot of folks are there because they want to spot their colleagues that they see once a year or rarely, and chum it up with them. So it's important to know. So what that means is that you show up in this room, there's a bunch of people, there may be food, there may not be food, there may be beverages, there may not be, and it's a chance to rapid fire connect with a bunch of people. And so people you have people milling about looking for folks they know or want to connect with. You have little groups of 2, 3, 5, 7 people huddled together, engaged in conversation, and people float between these groups. So it's this very interesting dynamic where people are milling about. It's classic social hour stuff, but can be really intimidating. Because if you're trying to connect with people, everybody's clustered in their little groups. It's like being at a corporate function or a house party or something where everybody's kind of clicked off, and you're like, how do I insert myself into some of these groups? So it can be tricky. This is a great place to be able to spot people you're looking for. So if you have a sense that a professor or graduate student you want to meet related to a given division might be at the convention, that's definitely a place to look, because a lot of people prioritize going to the social hours, though not everybody. It just really depends, especially if they're more introvertish. Some people avoid it like the plague, so it just really depends. You want to connect with people, you want to work the room, but you need to read body language a lot. So if you spot somebody who you think you have some sort of connection with and are wanting to talk with or get to know, you need to approach them. If they're by themselves, that's one thing. If they're in a group, it's kind of saddling up to the group and smiling and trying to listen into the conversation and hopefully not feel too awkward. But if you're trying to enter into a group of people because you're wanting to connect with a specific person, then you saddle up and say, oh, hey, Dr. X, my name is Joseph Hammer, and I'm a master's student at University of Missouri, and I'm a really big fan of your work and just wanted to say hi. So it might be as simple as that, where you approach them, say that, shake their hand, and then depending on how they respond, they either say, oh yeah, nice to meet you, see you later, then you walk off, or if they engage you in conversation, then you float along with that conversation. But when you're approaching people and engaging in dialogue, you really have to read their body language and their paraverbals. So see if they're interested in continuing to talk with you or not. Are they distracted? Are they looking at other people? Are they shying away? Are they closing their shoulder off to you and kind of squaring off in a different direction? Do they seem to want to continue to talk with you, or are they seeming to want to talk with the other people who are there, or they're wanting to float over to a different group? So be attentive, be very attentive to their body language, and do not force them to pay attention to you if their body language is telling you they want to end the conversation and engage with other people. Okay, you want to be conscientious, because if you're not, you'll end up annoying them, and that is not the first impression you want to create. So when you approach, you're really brief, and if they open the door to further dialogue with them, then you roll with that. If not, you say, well, it was nice to meet you, and then you walk off. You end it. And if the conversation is dying or just feeling like a lull, then just say, well, hey, Dr. X, it was a pleasure meeting you, or nice to see you again, or it was good to talk. Perhaps we'll run into each other later in the convention, or something like that. You can say little things and then duck out. You don't need to create this grand goodbye or anything like that. You just duck out of there. That's part of the culture of social hours, so people understand. if you are engaged in a conversation where you want to leave it, where you want to be meeting with other people or moving on, or this person's kind of glomming onto you and you don't like that, then say something like, then you just out of the blue can say, well, hey, person, it was nice meeting you, or it was nice seeing you again, or nice chatting with you. I'm gonna keep mingling here, or something like that. So you express appreciation for having connected with them, and then you bow yourself out. Or if you see somebody else, it's even easier. If you see somebody else you want to connect with, then you can say, hey, it was nice talking to you. I see my colleague or my buddy, or I see Dr. X over there, and I was wanting to connect with them, so I'm going to go do that. Something like that. People understand, and I say that all the time, where if I'm engaged with someone, I say, it was nice meeting you, or nice chatting. I see my colleague over there who I haven't seen since last year, so I want to go say hi to them. See you later. That sort of thing. That's perfectly acceptable. So it is really tough if you're going solo into a social hour and trying to like cold call, cold meet, so to speak, people. That's really tough. What is easier is if you have a wing person who you can go to the social hour with, because they can be your attachment base, right? And you can kind of feel secure because you can always talk to each other, and you can mill about the room and look for people to connect with, and maybe you break off to introduce yourself, or both of you walk over and introduce yourselves, or however you want to do it. But having a buddy there can be helpful. What is even better is if you can go to the social hour with someone who has a more well-developed social network than you, because then it's this whole dance that we do at social hours. It's who can introduce me to who? How can my network expand? So for some of us, we have our major professor or our advisor, or a fellow doctoral student or person in our research lab, or whatever it is. You have someone you have a connection with who has a bigger social network, who's willing to go with you to the social hour, and you're able to tag along with them, such that when they see people they know, because their network exists and expanded a bit, when they see somebody they know, they go, or hey, how you doing? Hey, let me introduce you to, or hey, I want to introduce you to Joe Hammer. He's a second-year master's student at University of Missouri, and he's interested in blah, blah, blah. So when people can introduce you, that's the gold standard. That's really the nice way to approach social hours, is to have an advocate, to have an advisor, to have someone who is doing the introductions. Because when you have somebody do the introductions, this person doing the introducing has street cred with the person they're connecting you with, right? It gives you legitimacy. It makes you interesting. It's kind of like they're vouching for you if they're introducing you. So when I've had folks introduce me to other people, the person the person who I'm being introduced to automatically pays attention a little bit to what's happening. They have an investment in keeping up social graces and saying, hey Joe, how you doing, and other stuff like that. So it's really nice if you can be introduced. And certainly as your network expands, you want to pay it forward, right? So you want to introduce other people in your social network to the folks that you know, and kind of pay it back and pay it forward, right? And what happens, so the magic of the APA convention is that you go a first time. It's really hard. You connect with a handful of people through this way or that way. And then the next time you're at the convention or at another conference or some other place, when you see them, then you each recognize each other's faces. And then there's that moment of recognition. And you restrike up a conversation, and then other people, then they can in turn introduce you to other people. But I'll say more about that later. I don't want to go into too much depth right now here. So, yeah, social hours. So you want to keep conversation to relevant topics, use some small talk. This is not the time for in-depth discussions about research or their programs or whatever. Social hours are for mingling, meeting and greeting. So you do not want to try and rope them into some deep discussion. So keep the conversation light, on topic, and concise. They will appreciate that. It helps them break off the conversation when they need to. You get in, you introduce yourself, you make a good first impression, kind of you put yourself in their brain, and then you exit gracefully. That's how it should go. What else? APAGS events. So as a graduate student, a wonderful place tailor-made for you is the APAGS, which is the Graduate Student Organization for APA. It's for and by graduate students, where they put on a lot of programming at the convention. They're like a division in a way. They host programming that you can go to. They host a lot of unofficial stuff. They've got social hours and happy hours and meet and greets and first-time attendees, rules of the road, and flying solo social hours where you can meet other people who are coming solo to the convention. Basically, they grease the wheels for graduate students. They've got the food for thought breakfasts every morning, where you can come, you get some breakfast, you listen to a speaker, you can connect with other graduate students. It's a great place, especially if you're nervous about stuff. Go to APAG stuff, because it's other students looking for people to connect with, and that's an easy audience, right? And as I think I mentioned before, a lot of times we're connecting first with graduate students, which then greases the wheels to getting connected with professors later on in the chain. And so APAGS is a great place to do that, especially across division, since they're not tied to one specific specialty. Likewise, when it comes to, say, Counseling Psych Division 17, they have their own student group, Student Affiliates of 17, abbreviated SAS. And that's where all the Counseling Psych student-specific programming happens. They also have ECP programs, which is Early Career Professional. That's for folks who have graduated with their doctorate and are still within 10 years of their degree, so they're still pretty new. So like for me, as of this recording in 2018, I'm an ECP because I'm three or so years out from my PhD. So there are those events too, and sometimes there's joint ECP/graduate student events that SAS has done, but go to SAS events. They have unofficial programming. You want to go on Division 17's website to the APA convention related stuff and download the schedule for the SAS events, because they have a healthy array of stuff relevant to students. So if you're into counseling psych programs or want to head in that direction, SAS events are a great way to meet other counseling psych students, and I'm sure the Clinical Psych Division 12 has a similar student group as well. So great thing to go to. And you also, and I think APA puts on a first-time attendees intro presentation on Thursday, which is worth going to generally too. So yeah, APAG stuff, SAS stuff, good stuff. One of the things, so in terms of other venues, we talked about symposia, which are, hit and miss, poster sessions, which are great, unofficial division section programming, which is great, social hours, which is scary, but can be really good, APAGS events and SAS events, and etc., which are great. And then by going to these programming things and events, it may create opportunities where you get to connect with people at coffee, at lunch, at dinner, at breakfast, in the evening. So ideally what you're trying to do is you're building some connections and relationships with folks you're meeting to the point where you've crossed that line of intimacy. It sounds weird, doesn't it? Where you've progressed your relationship to that point of familiarity. Yeah, that's better. Where you might be comfortable saying, hey, let's grab coffee together or share a meal together or whatnot. That's really nice when you cross into that point in your professional relationship with somebody where it can advance to that next level of depth. And so we're going to talk more about how to progress your networking connections to that degree. So that's it for this bit, and up next is how do I identify the specific APA events and programming to attend in order to connect with people. So what is that? Okay, so let's now talk about how do I know which programs which events to go to, because you got symposia and poster sessions and plenary sessions and invited presentations and unofficial programming and all this stuff that we talked about in the last video that are sponsored by APA generally, or specific divisions or sections within those divisions. And so what is the process for identifying the most promising activities for me to go to? So here's what I recommend, particularly as a new person. You've heard me mention the APA Convention app, I think, in prior videos. So you want to download that app for Android or iPhone, and that becomes available by early summer, typically. And so you download it and update it for that coming APA, and you can find this on the APA website, a link to it. What you can do with this app is search the official programming by division, by type of session, by day, by topical focus, various ways to look through the official convention programming. Now you notice I say official there because that unofficial stuff that sections host and whatnot is not going to show up in the app, so you need to bear that in mind. You're going to have to go find PDFs or websites with those unofficial schedules for divisions if you want to add that to your schedule. But start with the official programming, because that tends to be some of the most it can be more well attended, it can be higher quality, but not always. So you get that app, you play around with the different search criteria to identify poster sessions, symposia, etc. that fall into your areas of topical research interest or to the psych specialty area, like counseling psych or clinical psych, that's relevant to you. So you want to, what I prefer to do is figure out what divisions are relevant to you, your psych specialty or your research interests, and then search across the 4 days for programming by that division. So you click on search by division, and then you look day to day, hour to hour, what stuff that division is putting on. Some divisions are small and only have a few hours worth of programming at the convention, and some are much bigger, have more people, so they can offer a lot more programming, such as Division 17, Society of Counseling Psych. They have a lot of programming hours, so you're going to see something happening almost every hour of every day, at least between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., which are the typical times that programming is offered. So, and if you don't know what divisions are of interest to you, go on APA's website, look at the list of divisions, and read up on them, and figure out what's relevant, of course. You're going to probably prioritize division programming over general APA programming because you're going to meet people who are more relevant and aligned with stuff of interest to you and programs you're considering. So that's something to keep in mind. So for me, for example, I prioritize D17 events, counseling psych, because that's the folks I want to meet and hang out with and reunite with are hanging out in D17. But I also go to D51 and D36 events because those are some research interest areas of mine as well. So I will go to those events as well. Though I will start by looking at the programming for D17 and populate my schedule with that, and then look at the other divisions. So you will have your own kind of preference order for that. So what you can do in the app, it's really cool. When you're looking through programming, you can click the star icon for a given program or event, and it will add it automatically to this calendar. It's kind of like a Google Calendar, but built specifically into the app for the convention. So it automatically populates that date and time with the name of that program. And so you can go through, you can search by various criteria, add a bunch of programs, even if some of them are overlapping at the same time, and then go back later and pick your favorites. After going through divisions, using that as the search criteria, if you have open spots in your schedule, I recommend just searching for by day and looking at that specific time for all sorts of programming happening at that time, regardless of division, and then favorite a few things that are looking interesting to you, so you can fill in some of the gaps. But that's the most efficient way to approach it. You don't want to go day by day, regardless of divisions, just way too much stuff to wade through, way too much stuff that won't be as relevant to you, unless you're a perfectionist and have a lot of time. It's just not the best way to do it. So, in terms of priorities, my recommendations, prioritize poster sessions, like I talked about, prioritize social hours, prioritize going to division business meetings. It sounds boring, but it's a great place to meet people and get a sense of how things are happening and how the division operates. It's actually surprisingly good things to go to, and some divisions work it one way and some divisions work it another way. So it really varies in terms of what division's business hours are worth going to. But for example, D51 has a really nice collegial business meeting that's a real pleasure to go to. So these kind of friendly meet and greet events like social hours, business meetings, poster sessions, and other places where you can kind of freely mingle and talk with people, though I guess the business meetings aren't freely mingle. Yeah, I should clarify that. But these are good events, I think, to go to for connecting with folks. With symposia, we talked about that before. A lot of times symposia can feel really promising up front. You're really excited to hear the folks speak, but it ends up not being as on target and relevant, as interesting as you wanted. I think that ends up being a lot of people's experience. So I tend to only go to symposia where I'm super interested in the topic and or I know the presenters are really dynamite. Or if I'm trying to earn continuing education credits to maintain my licensure, then some programs are affiliated with continuing ed credits, and so I'm incentivized to go there. So, but symposia are not a place where you get that a lot of interaction or conversation because everybody's sitting in rows looking at the presenters being quiet so the presenters can talk. Sometimes there's discussion hours or roundtable events, which are kind of a different flavor of thing. Those can be nice, good connection events too. So discussion hours, roundtables, you can look for programming like that uses those terms. Those can be good to go to as well. Yeah, so that's symposia. We talked about unofficial programming. It's good to go to. It happens in hotel ballrooms or hotel meeting rooms or hotel suites that are reserved by certain divisions or whatnot. Smaller number of people, good place to connect. So we already talked about that in the last video. What you want to do, though, with the unofficial stuff is after you've had all the official stuff in the app, because you cannot search or automatically favorite unofficial stuff, you have to manually input the unofficial things into the app if you want to have it all in one place. Or you can just add the unofficial stuff in your smartphone calendar or whatever you want. I mean, for me, what I end up doing is I use the app and favoriting things, but then I have a shared Google Doc that I can access with my phone or a PC or whatever, and I will create an 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. schedule for every day, and I will write down kind of the favorite thing happening every hour, whether it's official or unofficial, and I'll sometimes consult the app schedule where I've got a bunch of things favorited that are overlapped when I want to craft that Google Doc schedule. But find something that works well for you. What else? Don't forget that you need to eat and sleep, right? You obviously know about the sleeping part. Especially if you get in with a good crowd and are hanging out late into the evening, it can be some real late nights and it can be hard to get up in the morning. So you may find yourself going to less early morning programming than you may have thought. Should also mention, like for me, I get super hangry if I'm not eating regularly, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, It may or may not be the case for you, but if you need regular meals or you tend to eat at a certain time, block that into your schedule. Write down lunch in big capital letters in this point, and maybe you can even find somebody to connect with to bring along, but make sure you have time set aside to eat, because those 10-minute passing times in between events are not enough to grab something to eat and drink and to rest your feet for a bit. It's not enough time. And all the stuff really super close to the convention can oftentimes be super busy because everybody's just trying to grab that quick bite before their next thing. So it's okay to have dead times, it's okay to have nap times and solo introvert time built into your schedule, because you want to keep up your momentum and your stamina through at least Saturday, right? Because stuff is happening Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you want to keep your stamina up at least through Saturday. Everybody's pretty dead Sunday. There's not a ton happening other than symposia and maybe a few poster sessions on Sunday, so everybody's a little dead then. But you don't want to be pooping out early in the evening when there's still so much more fun and networking to be had later in the day. And that's why you got to sleep, and that's why you got to eat, and maybe take some naps and some self-care time, because you want to keep that momentum up, because there's a lot of important networking within divisions that happens on Saturdays in particular. A lot of social hours happen then, so you do not want to be so dead that you can't bring your best self to those. So pace yourself, right? What else? And just in general, for some new folks, you may be really surprised how many simultaneous programs across divisions are happening during any given hour. And some of these events, these symposia, usually are 2 hours, not just an hour. And when we say an hour, that means 50 minutes. It's for the first 50 minutes, and then the last 10 till, that last 10 minutes is for travel time. And if it's a 2-hour thing, then it's some quick math, 110 minutes with that last 10 minutes for travel time. So be mindful of the fact that in between events, you're going to have to walk. The convention programming happens at the APA Convention Center, whatever that is, and then usually at 2 or 3 APA-sponsored hotels, which are quote-unquote the official hotels where APA programming that's not able to fit at the convention center is happening. So a lot of good stuff happens at these local sponsored hotels. They're usually some of the nicer ones, usually some of the ones closer to the convention center. And so depending on the city and the hotels selected and the convention center, sometimes the walk is really substantial. A lot of times it takes more than 10 minutes to get from one room to the next, even within the convention center itself. There are some convention centers in certain cities where they're so spread out. Like Orlando comes to mind as a really spread out thing. Hawaii, Honolulu comes to mind, where you can be walking for a long time to get from one end of the convention center to the other, and certainly between the convention center and certain hotels. And a lot of times 2 of the 3 hotels will be close, but the 3rd one will be far. And so you have to then try and take one of the shuttle buses. APA tries to run some shuttle buses between the convention center and the convention hotels, the 3 designated hotels, but those are real hit and miss. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes they're not on time. It's just, I end up needing to walk places to be assured that I can get somewhere on time. But I also have to look at a Google map. I also have to look at a Google map at the 3 hotels and the convention center and do some, walking distance, time calculations using Google Maps to see how long it's going to take me to travel between some of these things I've selected. So, and sometimes you won't know because you haven't been to that city for a convention yet, and so you'll learn as you go, of course. And sometimes you'll just be like, well, I can't make this session, timing didn't work out, so that's okay, I just won't make it. But in general, it's good to do some pre-planning to see when you can realistically get from one session happening the first hour to a second session that starts 10 minutes later. So it can be tricky. And sometimes if you know it's going to take you a bit to walk or whatnot, you may need to leave a session a bit early or get to the next session a bit late. If you're going to be leaving early, sit at the end of the rows at the back of the room so that you don't disturb other people. Okay, I tend to be a big fan of that, especially since I like to stand at the back of the room to stretch my body out a little bit, so I'm not doing so much sitting the whole day. So I really prioritize those end row seats towards the back so I'm not disturbing other people when I'm leaving or standing up or whatnot. And that's a self-care thing that seems appropriate to mention. I have back trouble, so sitting for long periods of time is pretty painful for me. So that's why I like to be able to stand for chunks of time or alternate between sitting and standing. So sometimes I'll stand/sit at the back of the room, even if it means sitting on the carpeted floor sometimes for those sitting points, and then standing up and leaning up against a wall at other times. Sometimes I step out into the hall so I can walk it off a little bit. So it's okay to engage in some self-care. Sitting for long periods of time at event after event can be tough. And that's also one of the reasons I like poster sessions is because you get to stand, sit, walk around, duck out, come back in, whatever you want to do. Same with social hours and whatnot, though I guess it's just a lot of walking and standing, not too much sitting usually, unless it's a smaller division. So, you know, be mindful of your body, take care of yourself. If you have a disability, make sure you can find ways to be comfortable. So yeah, should mention that side note. What else? Yeah, I think that's it. You just got to be mindful of travel time between places. It can take way longer than you think. And sometimes you're going to get caught in conversation with people after a symposium, or you're going to have a really interesting poster session discussion. You really got to go to the bathroom or grab a bite or whatever it is. So a lot of times your best laid plans of like, I'm going to go to this and then this and this, it's all going to be awesome. You know, it's going to fall apart because real life happens and things get in the way, or interesting opportunities or plans or opportunity to conversate with somebody comes up. So there have been times where I go to an event, but I'm having a really good or interesting and important conversation with someone, and so we'll step into the hall, or we'll go grab coffee, or we'll do something else, and I'll throw away my plans for the next hour because I've judged, you know, this is more important to be able to connect with this person. So you will get to make those decisions on the fly. And if you're connecting with somebody and want to continue the conversation, but you really do need to go to the next thing that's coming up, you can always try and pause the conversation, express your interest, and see if you all can meet up again later in the convention to continue that discussion. So, in conclusion, for this video, these are some of this is kind of the approach I like to use and recommend you use for figuring out which specific programming events to go to that are in line with your interests. Because going in with a plan is helpful so that you're not just going to things on a whim, figuring it out the hour before. Otherwise, it makes it hard for you to go to the best places for the best networking or to learn the best things. Though, of course, there are a gazillion people who go to APA convention who literally are not looking at the programming until they're on their smartphones on the plane headed to the convention. So, you know, everybody's style is different. Just make sure it works for you. You know, looking at my MBTI scores, I'm stronger on that judging dimension, so I like to be planful. And so if you're like me and want to kind of have a plan in advance on how to efficiently use your time, this is an approach I recommend. Yep. All right, and next we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the process of connecting, the moment-by-moment navigation of a conversation or an interaction to help do this networking thing we're all supposed to know how to do, but nobody tells us the specifics of. So I'm going to try and unpack some of that step-by-step process to kind of break it down into its constituent pieces as it relates specifically to connecting at APA. All right. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to talk about this step-by-step process of connecting with people, the nuts and bolts of networking at the convention. And so I'm sure there's plenty of other people in this world who are much better at describing this process, but I'm going to try and make it as contextually relevant to APA, and it's going to basically be capturing everything I've personally come to learn about this process of connection. It's just my opinion, and you know, hopefully it can help you think about this process a little bit. So, it's important to know why professors go to APA and what they like to do at APA, as this is going to help you understand their motivations and priorities and how you can make sure not to step on their toes when you're trying to connect with them. So, and I'm going to be speaking for myself as a professor. Of course, everybody is unique and has a different approach, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who kind of approach the convention like I do. So this isn't going to be everybody. It's not going to be every professor, but probably a good chunk of them. So that's an important caveat. So professors, when they go to APA, certainly they're presenting their research, trying to share some stuff they're excited about, and you know, develop further their professional expertise and image and profile by presenting some research and sharing it with other people and getting others excited about their research. So there's that professional piece. But perhaps even bigger for a lot of us is the connection. It's a big reunion. For those of us who go regularly especially, it's the one time a year where we get to see a bunch of people in our profession, in our specialty, in our area of interest, where we never get to see them otherwise. So there's a ton of people I see once a year. It's at the APA convention, and it's so wonderful to be able to reconnect with them. It's a real gift. It's folks who I've come to know personally or professionally, and who I just really enjoy spending time with. And it's so nice to see them that first time at each new APA, and to reconnect with them and catch up and see how things are going. And it's just really awesome. It's a wonderful experience to have, and something I hope for everybody who is eventually destined for academia or coming to the convention regularly. So when I go to the convention, I'm really looking forward to connecting with those folks that I know, and also meeting some new people that I should know and are worth connecting, both professors and graduate students. This is doc students and master students and bachelor students, because I have a research lab, I'm at a counseling psych PhD program, and I'm always looking to recruit really strong students to come join the Hammer Lab. And so I'm on the lookout to connect with folks who might be interested in joining me and us working on stuff together at our program. So, what else? Sometimes we're also trying to earn continuing education credits by attending various presentations that will help us earn those credits. So I have to do that to maintain my psychologist licensure, for example. And so sometimes I need to skedaddle to an event so that I can get there on time to get the continuing ed credits. Many of us don't feel the need to proactively connect with prospective students, as our work may speak for itself sometime. I don't put myself in that category. I'm pretty intentional about trying to network with folks, but for a lot of folks who are really preeminent psychologists or who have really well-known bodies of work, they don't have to do active networking because they draw people to them, right? People know who they are just through their written work. They don't even have to show up to convention. So I'm not quite there yet. Don't know if I'll ever be, but I'm definitely interested in connecting with folks across the professional development spectrum. But it will definitely vary from professor to professor. But this context, it's useful to know because it helps you understand how professors are going to approach conversations with prospective students and others, and how they're trying to spend their time at social hours, and their priorities and time management and all that stuff. So, if you are looking to eventually or soon apply to doctoral programs, as that's what this video series is mostly geared towards, folks in that vein, you're going to want to know which professors are or are not taking students for next year. So if you're going to be applying to certain programs that have professors that align with your research interests or your professional interests or whatnot, you want to, of course, know which of those professors at the programs are of interest are taking students next year. Sometimes they make that clear on their websites, sometimes you just won't know. But if you're having to be intentional with who you seek out and try and connect with, and you've got a bunch of people, if you know some people are not taking students and you're going to be applying this fall, it may be less important to try and connect with that person this year because they won't be taking a student, and you won't have a chance of getting into that program. If you're still a few years off from applying for doctoral programs, that's great. It means you got more time. You have a few more years to develop your social network. So I went the first time in 2006 to the New Orleans APA convention as an undergraduate student, so before my senior year. So I went prior to my senior year of undergrad, prior to my first year of my master's program, and prior to my second year of my master's program. So by the time I was applying for doc programs to transition to after my master's, it was my third APA of having networked with folks. And that was really helpful because folks got a better, kind of knew more so who I was. More people knew who I was, and that can be helpful if you can make a good first impression with folks. By the way, I did record a YouTube video about the pros and cons of emailing a professor in advance to ask if they're taking a student for next year, and to ask, do I need to email the professor to introduce myself before they receive an application? I did a whole video on that you can find on my YouTube channel, just as an aside. So if you want to connect with a professor and you've identified a certain number of professors and maybe they're graduate students who work in their lab or other faculty who are at those programs of interest who are also going to be looking over your eventual doctoral program application, you want to know something about these folks. So if you're looking to apply to work with a given professor in a given program, you want to have read some of their research, right? Read some of their recent stuff, read some of their best cited historical work. If I'm meeting someone for the first time as a professor, and I tend to have a positive impression of folks when they say that they're interested in me and can mention, sometimes indirectly, some of the things they know about my work. It shows that they did their homework. It shows that they actually have read my work, care about my work enough to have read it and learned a little bit about me. When folks can mention stuff on my website or resources that I've provided to students, that shows me that they've looked into me and they're serious, and that's a positive impression. So, read over their website, read over their digital presence, whatever they put out there to describe themselves. Know what they say about themselves, know some of their published work. You definitely don't want to be asking questions of them that could have been answered by going on their program's website or their professional website or their faculty page or some other freely available source, because otherwise it shows you didn't do your homework. If you're asking them questions that you could have answered online, that's a big no-no. And that's very true for when you're going on doctoral interviews, by the way. And speaking of that, I did a top 10 tips for doctoral interview performance, for kind of making a good first impression when you go on doctoral interviews. So check out that video as well. What else? It's tricky. When you're if your goal is to try and make a good first impression with a professor, it's this balance of introducing yourself, showing interest, showing that you know something about them, but not trying too hard, not coming across as what some people call a try-hard, or putting in too much effort, being over-eager, being a little too intense. There's a line between showing interest and kind of going overboard, and that can be sometimes hard to articulate and easier to kind of know it when you see it. So you can, if you're approaching me, you can be able to say how much you enjoyed reading about, this study that I did, or how you appreciate this aspect of their recent research, or you can express appreciation or interest or some other positive accolade of something they're about. That can be good, but you don't want to do that from a patronizing perspective, as if you're on the same kind of prestige level of them. So some students I've noticed in my work, and honestly, when I was a student, maybe I was guilty of doing this a little bit, which probably connects to some of my identity as a white male, which again, there's a video for that on the YouTube channel where I talk about my cultural identity and how that's influenced my professional development. Whole other topic. Some students kind of approach me and say, hey, you did a really great job with your study on stigma and help seeking among men, or something like that. And when you say, hey, you did a really good job, that's something that usually someone in higher authority or higher status says to someone of lower authority or status. That's what parents tell kids. That's what a supervisor tells a supervisee, but it feels a little wrong. It feels a little disrespectful to send that up the chain to someone. It's a little, it comes across as a little arrogant or haughty, as if it's like, who are you to to say my work was good? I know my work is good. That's for me and my peers on my professional level to decide. So there's a balance between acknowledging some of the prestige and professional hierarchies that exist in psychology and in academia in these programs, and not going overboard with that, right? So we're all human beings. We're all deserving of kindness and respect and autonomy, and voice, right? So there's a balance between demonstrating proper respect when respect is due and that equality of voice. And this is probably painfully obvious to many of you listening, but for some of you it may not be. But I tell you, I run into plenty of students every year where they come across as if they're better than me, or they're talking like they're a professor or they're a supervisor, and it feels insulting. And I think that is an experience that other professors can relate to. So be mindful of that there's expressing appreciation and interest and awe of someone's work is one thing versus saying, hey, you did a good job, is a completely different thing. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully I haven't beaten this topic to death. Probably have. That's my perfectionism talking, right? So, ways in which when I was networking with folks, I would just try and like name drop. I would try and kind of subtly hint at some of the stuff I know they do or have worked on, rather than kind of being uber obvious, hitting them over the head with it. So I wouldn't want to say, hey, I read your 2013 paper on this and your 2015 paper on this, and I really like how you study X, Y, and Z. It's a little kind of direct and unsophisticated. But what feels more sophisticated is, I've really enjoyed reading your work about how help-seeking factors play out differently across these different populations, and how masculinity factors come into that. I find it so interesting, and it really speaks to my lived experience and stuff that I've seen, and it's gotten me really excited about trying to contribute to research in this area. Right, so that's it kind of names and mentions some of the stuff you know about them and their body of work, but it's not, let me brag or let me prove to you that I know what you have done, right? It's not that unsophisticated style. So hopefully that makes sense a bit. Now, depending on the setting or the venue, the way in which you're approaching or introducing yourself to a professor or a graduate student is going to vary. If it's at a symposium and they've just presented and you're going up to the front of the room afterwards as they're packing up their bag, then you might say something like, hey, Dr. Hammer, I really enjoyed your presentation. This stuff is just really fascinating, and it's gotten me so interested and wanting to contribute in this area. And yeah, I just wanted to come up and express my appreciation. I might say something like, hey, Dr. Hammer, my name is John Smith, and I'm a master's student at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and it's cool to meet you, because I've been reading some of your work and was really excited to learn more about this study that you're doing this poster on. And then let them respond however they respond, and then respond in kind, or maybe suggest like, hey, so would you mind giving me an overview of the study? And so that's a typical thing that people will ask at poster sessions, is to ask for that, the elevator speech, that Cliff Notes version, but using more appropriate language. You wouldn't necessarily use those terms, but people will say, so tell me about this project, or you can read the poster first and then ask specific questions about it. There are different ways to approach that, but I think I'll probably go into some more detail about poster stuff in a bit. What else? If you're approaching them at a social hour, then I kind of gave some examples in prior videos about how you might briefly introduce yourself and then ease your way out of the group to not be in their hair, stuff like that. Now, kind of regardless of venue, unless it's a symposium and they're having to duck out, you're not going to go to this place in the conversation. But if you've had a good connection with a professor, if you've started that small talk and it's gone okay, you feel like you're making a decent first impression, then you can casually mention that you're applying to doctoral programs this fall and that you look forward to submitting your application to their program. And you can say it just like that. So, well, hey, Dr. Hammer, it was really nice to meet you. I'm applying to doctoral programs this fall, and I know that you're at university so-and-so, I'm really love your work and am interested in your program, so I'm looking forward to submitting an application this fall. And just kind of leave it at that, and they can say what they'll say. So you can mention the fact that you plan to apply, if that's true. So if you want to cue them to that fact and allow them to potentially respond or explore the conversation further or open that door, you can. So you don't have to hit them over the head direct with it, but you can just mention that, hey, I'm applying to doctoral programs this fall and looking forward to applying to your program. And it's even better if you can kind of keep it focused on their program rather than say, I'm applying to a bunch of doctoral programs, or something else that would kind of imply this implicit message of that it's really not about them specifically. You're just applying to a bunch of places and they're in the mix. Like, that doesn't feel very personalized or very good. So instead, it's just good to say that you're applying to doc programs this fall and look forward to submitting your application to their program. And maybe if you want to say a little bit about the program, you can. But you don't want to overdo it, and you don't want to be presumptive, saying things like, I look forward to getting an interview, or something like that, or anything where the implicit message is, I know I'm a strong applicant, and I'm looking forward to you recognizing that fact, or I'm expecting that I'm going to get an interview, or other presumptive, haughty, arrogant things. Again, this is coming from my personal experience as a professor, where some students will come across in that way, as if they kind of think they have it in the bag, or know that I'm going to be interested in them, or something like that. So you definitely don't want to come across in that way. And if you have questions about the nature of a given professor's program, a lot of times those questions can be asked of a graduate student from that program rather than the professor, because you'd rather use the graduate student's time in that way rather than ask your professor to focus their time on answering questions about a program that they can really get that information elsewhere. It's just a courtesy you can show professors. So it's good to connect with graduate students from that program that you can ask that question about, because your time in interacting with professors, if you're trying to network and connect, your focus is really on making that good first impression, helping put a face to your eventual application, right? And so you don't want to do anything that's going to get in the way of that first impression. You don't want to take up too much of their time. You want to be mindful of how much time and space and attention you're asking from them. You want to be mindful that they have an agenda for how they want to spend their time at the convention. You don't want to get in the way of that. You don't want to do anything that's going to irritate them. So hopefully that makes sense. And when you approach professors, and this advice is kind of talked about in some of my other videos and resources, and especially the Kiss of Death resources that I linked to from my graduate school advice page, you want to come across as warm, attentive, a good listener, positive, upbeat, those typical interpersonal qualities that I talk about in the interpersonal video of my How to Get Into a PhD Counseling Psych Program video series. Those sort of interpersonal qualities you, of course, want to demonstrate in how you're interacting with this professor. So show that professionalism and warmth. Show, indirectly that you've read their work and are passionate about their general research area. And I've got to tell you that some professors really like to personally connect with prospective students or current graduate students, and others do not. It just really depends, because professors are people first and professors second, so everybody has a different kind of style about who they want to connect with or how they want to spend their time. So just know that every professor is different, and you just may not know what to expect. So, for me, if you were to approach me, I'm generally interested in connecting with prospective students as well as current students and professors and other folks. So I tend to be pretty warm and attentive in response to people's attempts to connect with me. But other people, are going to have their own style. So it's really important that in whatever APA setting, whatever programming setting you're approaching them, that you want to read their body language and their paraverbals, which is how they say what they're saying, as well as the verbal content of what they're saying, to see if they're open to continuing the conversation or if they're trying to shut down the conversation. Right, it's super important to use those emotional intelligence and interpersonal awareness skills to read the situation in them. So if they're antsy, if they're looking elsewhere, if they're closing off to you, if it's clear they're not so interested in this conversation you're having right now, get out of their hair. Thank them for their time, or say, it was really nice to meet you, and then get out. Get out of the way. It's fine. They will appreciate that. What they will not appreciate is when they're trying to send nonverbal signals, because they oftentimes will not necessarily, like most people, send a direct verbal. They will not verbally say, I don't want to be in this conversation anymore, right? That's defying social convention in this country. Although some of us can sometimes be that direct, but hopefully it's in a compassionate way, of course. But most of us are not willing to be direct like that, and we're going to be indirect. We want to allow the student to save face. We don't want to embarrass them. So we try and send nonverbal signals that, hey, I'd really like for this conversation to end. I'd like to be able to talk with other peoples or be on my way or whatever. And so be attentive to those signals so that you can cut things off. You can duck out when that's clear. In contrast, if they're showing continued interest and you yourself want to continue it, keep rolling with it. Keep talking, keep asking about stuff, doing whatever you're doing. If they're interested, you're on the right track. But as soon as that interest wanes, be attentive to that. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's kind of approaching the professor stuff. If any of their graduate students in their research lab, the people who they're major professors for, so when they're acting as faculty advisor to certain graduate students, which is the case at most programs. So if you can interact with a given professor's graduate students, that is a great idea too. So even if you are able to connect with the professor, connect with their graduate students, or if their professor is kind of intimidating or not at APA convention or is otherwise less accessible, definitely connecting with their graduate students is important if the graduate students show up at APA. Everybody's graduate students differ. My graduate students do tend to go to APA, and so you can hit them up and ask what it's like to work with me and learn about the program and other stuff like that. But asking the professor's graduate students is great because it's less intimidating. Graduate students are kind of closer to you in developmental level, so they're oftentimes kind of more willing and easier to connect with. It's just a great springboard. So graduate student talking points can be asking about themselves, asking about their research, what's it like to work with professor. You can say things like, hey, I noticed you can look at their name tag, right? Everybody's wearing name tags front and center. And so you can see their name and what institution they're coming from. So, talking points oftentimes revolve around that. And when we're trying to connect with someone, if we know something about that program or know someone at that program, that's often a talking point. Because if you're trying to meet people, you're trying to meet strangers in a situation, the way conversation starts up is that you talk about a shared thing that you both know about or care about or that you're seeing in the environment, right? It's just an excuse to start a conversation as you name a shared experience you both have. So what'd you think of that presentation? Or, wow, what was that like there? Wow, that was really interesting, don't you think? Or, man, it's packed house in here. It's just this small talk stuff that we use as an excuse to start a dialogue with somebody rather than saying, hey, you're interesting, I want to talk to you. Though some people will do that too. Check out what institution they're from. If they're from an institution that has a program of interest to you, you can use that as a springboard. You can say something like, hey, I noticed from your name tag that you're at Iowa State University, and that's actually a program I've been considering for applying to this fall. And you can stop it there, or you can add, how do you like it? Something like that, because usually people like to talk about themselves and their experience, and so that can be a way that you can learn about a program or a person, and it's more accessible because they're a graduate student. And you might even, you can mention that you've been considering applying to their program if you think that fits in to the narrative. And so this is good talking with grad students because it helps you get info about the program, get the experience of the students, because professors have their perspective on the program, but you can get the raw, straight skinny from graduate students and hear about the pros and the cons sometimes from students. So yet another good reason to connect with them. And when you connect with graduate students of a given professor, this opens the door to the possibility, it's not guaranteed, but opens the door to the possibility of the graduate student maybe saying, well, hey, let me introduce you to my major professor, or let me introduce you to that faculty member in my program, or whatever it is. So they may volunteer or may be prone to help you connect with that professor. So in this way, especially earlier in your professional development, you're trying to build your networking by starting by connecting with a lot of graduate students, which then helps you connect with later more advanced doc students and helps you connect with professors eventually. So we're kind of networking increasingly up that. A lot of times when you're trying to make small talk with folks, and some of this is more appropriate for graduate students versus professors because it depends on how much familiarity you have with the person, but there's some small talk phrases that I hear a lot that I think tend to work well, and so I thought I'd share some of those. So small talk stuff you might talk about is, how's the convention been so far? What stuff did you really enjoy from the convention? Did you end up going to see that talk about X, Y, and Z, or did you go to the opening ceremony, or did you end up making it to the social hour, or if you know they went to a given thing, how was that event on racial discrimination across SES, or whatever the example is. If you know you were both at a given presentation or event, you can ask them for their reactions to the thing or share your own reactions to it. You can also ask about, have you had a chance to see stuff outside of the convention? Because it's in big cities usually, the convention, and so people will sometimes try to pair tourism or other sorts of sightseeing things with some work. And so if there are popular local attractions or key events or landmarks that are popular for folks to go visit, you can check in about if they've had a chance to go outside and what they thought of the places they visited and the tourist stuff that they did. So you can inquire about that. But just like we know from our core counseling skill development, open questions are better than closed questions. So asking a question that could be answered with a simple yes or no is not as ideal as asking an open question that starts with what or how, because that gets people talking more when they're asked an open question. So this sort of small talk conversation that doesn't require a huge investment on their part in the conversation can end swiftly and they can move on if they so wish. That sort of small talk stuff helps build rapport. And you do have to read the person in terms of whether to ask about more in-depth questions. And there's some balance in terms of asking about their research interests or what they've been working on recently and stuff like that, because sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not. But it's good to have typical professional related questions in your toolbox, as well as some general small talk sorts of things, like how's the convention been so far? And stuff like that. So, if you've had a successful conversation with this person and the interactions seem to go well, and this advice is specific more so to graduate students, because this can be a tough ask of a faculty member, especially if you're not yet, say, an advanced doc student who might soon become a faculty member. So this is something you'd say to like a fellow graduate student. You might say something like, hey, I enjoyed talking with you, and I look forward to running into you later at the social hour, or I look forward to running into you later in the convention. Or you can say, well, I see you later at the division social hour today, or some other way that you can signal to them that you enjoyed this interaction and would be open to additional conversation with them. So you can kind of cue them to your interest without being too blunt. And you'll only make such an offer, you'll only say such a thing if your interaction with them seemed to go well, and your read is that they seem to appreciate talking to you, that they found the little interaction, the conversation with you as interesting as you did. Because if they didn't seem that interested in what y'all were talking about, they may not really want to have follow-up conversation with you. But if you seem to hit it off, if you seem to connect in a meaningful way, then you can try and open the door and let them know that, hey, it'd be nice to talk more about this or that, or catch up more, or whatever it is. So you can cue them at the end of a conversation if you're hoping to get a round two, and so on with them. And so the first time, so this process of connection ideally plays out over multiple years. And by making those initial connections the first time you go to the APA convention, then you will see some of those same people you connected with at the next year's convention or the next time you go. And what will happen is you'll see that person, you'll recognize their face, you'll say, where do I know them from? Or they look familiar, but you won't remember their name or probably even what you talked about with them. And that's okay. So if you run into each other at the next convention and you recognize their face and they seem to recognize your face, a lot of times you'll come together at that social hour or poster session, and one of you will say something like, hey, how's it going? Because you don't remember their name yet, and you haven't been able to sneak a glance at their name tag to remember their name. So folks will say, hey, how's it going? And you can just do small talk stuff and say, hey, it's you, or you can look at their name tag. It's okay to look at folks' name tags because people know nobody remembers names. It's just the reality of things, especially APA when you're meeting a gazillion people. So if you recognize somebody, walk up to them. You don't have to hide it if you don't want, but you could look at their name tag and say, hey, Jason, it's really good to see you. I remember us talking last year. Or, hey, Jason, how's it going? Or, how was your year? Because a lot of times it's been 1 year since you've seen them. So it's just a small talk re-engagement with them to let them know that, hey, you remember them too, and that it's good to see them, and how's it going? That sort of thing. So you're just looking to reconnect and rekindle what you started to build at the last convention. And this facial recognition, where you kind of recognize each other even if you don't remember quite know how you know them, it creates this sense of camaraderie, familiarity, and creates easier conversation in the future. Because if you recognize each other the next time you see them, then there's an obvious excuse to talk to them, because it's no longer the first time where you had to find something to ask them about, or they had to be standing next to a poster so you could ask them about that, or you had to be at the same event and so you had to make some comment about the event in order to strike up a conversation. Those rules don't apply. That stricture doesn't apply. Because you recognize each other, that is the excuse to restrike up a conversation. You don't need any other excuse. And so each time you see them at a new convention, so you connect a little bit at the second time you see them, and then you say, hey, look forward to seeing you next year. And then you see them that next year. Each time you can cultivate that relationship a little bit deeper. And so this is how connections and colleagueships and friendships develop. Even if you're only seeing someone once a year, sometimes you can have a substantive conversation or a good interaction each year, and that builds up over time. And then when you're walking around the social hour and you're like, okay, who do I talk to? I want to find someone to talk to. Who's here that I know? Then you see that person that you recognize, and it feels like you're old friends. It's really nice. And the cool thing is especially when you're seeing them for the second time, whether it's later in your first convention or during your second convention, if that second interaction goes well again and you feel yourself growing closer to them, then that opens the door to seeing if you can transition the relationship beyond, oh, hey, we're at this APA programming event and we're talking with each other. You might be able to take it to that next big level, which is the two of you, maybe in the context of a group or maybe one-on-one, explicitly making arrangements to spend time with each other. So something like, hey, you're going to be at the social hour today. And they say, yeah. And you say, okay, cool. Maybe we can grab a drink or something after something like that. Hour. You're cueing them that you're interested in taking it to the next level. And so each time you see them at the convention, your relationship and rapport is stronger, and you slowly march towards a closer relationship with them that provides a rationale for you asking them to spend time with you over coffee or meals or in the evening or whatever. So look for opportunities to build camaraderie in conversation by talking about the stresses of graduate school or interesting current events, or asking them in-depth questions about their program or what research they're interested in or how things are going professionally, and talking about whatever seems of mutual interest to you and them. And again, this is most pertinent to graduate students, where your range of topics is going to be more professional and respectful and narrower when it comes to professors usually, because there's that kind of respect hierarchy that is in place. And so the idea is to really intentionally grow your network, because you want to have professional connections, you want to build a sense of place and community and home within the division. You want to have cool people to hang out with every time you go, especially if you're going to be a future graduate student and coming to many more APA conventions, hopefully. So I really feel, for example, a deep sense of home in D17 and also D51. I feel like I belong. I feel like people know who I am and like who I am generally, and are interested in how my past year has been, and I'm really interested in hearing about their life has been and hearing about their victories and struggles and interesting things happening in their program. It's just a really cool place to come and reconnect and get back in tune with folks. And it's a really great thing, and I would want that for anybody who's going to be going regularly to the convention. So you do want to be intentional about finding some people you really connect with, typically graduate students, maybe the odd professor here and there, especially if a mentoring sort of relationship might develop because they take an interest in you and want to help you. That's great if that happens. You want to cultivate these relationships so that after a good interaction or two, whether at the same convention or across multiple conventions, at some point you signal to them, hey, it would be really cool, would you be interested in grabbing coffee later in this convention, or sharing dinner or something like that. It's good to try and take it to that next level with those folks who you connect well with. And I really encourage you, if you have a group of fellow students there, folks from your program, do invite people you connect with who might seem interested in hanging out with you and your crew. Invite them out if that's acceptable with your fellow comrades, because it's really nice when someone includes you in something, right? You know how that is when you're invited into a group or to come hang out or do something with a group, especially at a kind of public, scary, big event like APA. It's so appreciated. Some of you may know how that feels when you receive that kindness. And so give out that kindness, reciprocate, pay it forward. When folks clearly want to connect with you, if you're open to that, see if you can include them in on social plans and what's happening. And hopefully folks will do that to you. So if you have a good connection with someone and they know their group is going to be going out to dinner, perhaps they may consider inviting you along. Obviously it's not socially acceptable to try and invite yourself to people's group functions, because that's not your place. It's not the offer needs to be made. Oftentimes you can't really request it. You might try and non-verbally show that you'd be interested in it. A lot of times what happens, for example, at social hours at the end of the day, social hours are happening around 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. oftentimes, and so one of the things that people are doing at social hours is they're angling and trying to figure out dinner plans, because sometimes people have set plans in advance of the convention or a few days before the convention, especially with people they know, but a lot of times some plans come together spontaneously. So folks go to the social hour with the intention of, among other things, finding some cool people to go to dinner with. And so sometimes I'll find myself in that place where I'm like, okay, I know I want to eat and have fellowship with some folks, but I don't quite know who. I don't know who will be. So I'm going to go to the convention, and as I'm talking and reuniting with some of the people I know, I'm going to be checking in to see if folks might be interested in grabbing a bite to eat with me, or if there's a group of folks that I know where I could tag along. And so that's that can sometimes be happening. That's those making plans, and that also extends to making plans for the evening hours. Because after the official programming is over around 4, 5, or 6 on most days, then it's unstructured. Sometimes APA sponsors like a museum night or official events or community events, but in general the time is unstructured. And so if you want to maximize your enjoyment and the productivity of that time, you have to make connections with people so you have folks to hang out with. And so ideally, you can be spending time with one group of people or a person at dinner from 6 to 8ish, and then you're making plans to connect and hang out with other people from 8 to 10 or 11ish later in the evening. It's good to have folks to hang out with, whether that's going out to a bar with folks to hang out, or a cool spot, or a tourist attraction, or whatever it is. You want to try and use that time. Or if you're an early to bed, early to rise person, then you go home and catch some sleep. Though of course a lot of times that can be dependent on your roommates and how many folks you're rooming with, and will they keep you up, and all that stuff. And we'll talk more about those logistics in a second, in a later video, rather. And I should mention too that during the first few days, when you have multiple days later, if you're having an interaction with someone and you're hoping to start that conversation back up and reconnect with them later in the convention, then you can mention, hey, look forward to seeing you later in the convention. When it's Saturday and Sunday, and so the convention is coming to a close, then you start to reframe that language in terms of next year. If, for example, you're going to be at APA next year, which you may not or you may not know. So I'll start to say on Saturday and Sunday, well, hey, look forward to seeing you next year. Or a very common question is, are you planning to be at APA next year? Or will I see you at APA next year? Folks will oftentimes say that to kind of get a sense of whether they'll get to see and reconnect with folks the subsequent year. So that's some small talky stuff that happens with that. And by kind of insinuating or making plain to them that you look forward to chatting with them again, seeing them again at next convention, again sets that tone, sets you up, and foreshadows hopefully a reconnection and a deepening of that connection the next year, because you're planting seeds, right? You're building relationship and signaling to them your continued interest, and hopefully they're reciprocating, right? And again, a big theme of this advice is, for a lot of you, this is all head-slappingly obvious. It's like, dude, I know how to make friends with people. I know how to talk with people. But this is not the case for a lot of folks who are maybe more homebodies or introverts, or just didn't have as much practice doing the social butterfly party-going thing in larger groups, right? So a lot of us are not too practiced in this, and that's why I'm trying to break it down in painfully concrete and obvious step-by-step mechanics and language. So I'm hoping that it's helpful to at least some folks. So we do a lot of this sort of social dance stuff informally and unconsciously in daily life, but because APA convention is so big and unique, and there's some implicit rules about how to connect or what kind of conversations to have or not, I think sharing some of this context is hopefully helpful. And it also requires that we be very intentional about how we seek to connect and network with others, because it's not, hey, I'm in my hometown and I'm trying to connect with folks who might be friends, but this is also intentional professional networking, because not only are you trying to grow your network of folks who you like to spend time with and feel connected to, but it's also growing a professional network of people who can speak to your warmth, your compassion, your interpersonal sensitivity, your emotional awareness, your professionalism, your energy, your passion, your seriousness. You want people to know you and to be able, when somebody is considering your application for a job at an agency or an academic program or something, and they're talking to other people in their social network about the applicants, it's nice if the people they talk to know who you are and have nice things to say about you, right? So this intentional professional networking can facilitate that and help people know that you're a known quantity, that you'll be a good thing if they accept you to come to their business or their program. And again, that can apply to both if you're looking for faculty jobs or a student applying for doctoral programs. You want to put a good first impression, a good face to the materials that you'll be sending in. And it's important to make sure your name tag, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, make sure your name tag is hanging front and center on your clothing so that people can easily see your name. And make sure, if you, like for me, my formal name is Joseph Hammer, but I go by Joe. And so I make sure that my name tag has the Joseph Hammer with the PhD on on the middle line, but up top in big letters it says Joe, nice and simple. So when you're inputting your information into the APA registration portal, you want to make sure that your name is displayed how you want it so that people know how to address you, and you want to make sure your institution name is accurate, because the thing that people will use if they don't know who you are, if they don't recognize and know who you are, or even if they might know but are not sure, their eyes will go to your name tag, to your institution, because we pair people with programs. And so we look at a person in their name tag and we want to see what program are they from. Are they at a program where I know somebody there? So when I'm looking at folks' name tags and I see somebody's from University of Missouri or Iowa State University or University of Wisconsin-Madison or Louisville or wherever, because I know people, both graduate students when I was a graduate student and increasingly professors now that I'm a professor, I'm more likely to want to talk and connect with that person because we have a connection, right? There's a degree or two of separation. And that's something that's advantageous. So hopefully folks see your name tag and what institution you're at, and they'll be inclined to try and connect with you because they may happen to know a person or have some sort of connection to that institution. So you want to make sure that's front and center on your name tag. And you yourself are often going to be using someone's institution as a excuse for striking up a conversation. So if you know someone at University of Kentucky and you see this graduate student has a University of Kentucky name tag, that can provide an excuse to say, oh hey, I see you're from University of Kentucky. I'm Joe Hammer. I'm a second year master's student at University of Illinois, and I know Doug Spiker, who's a student at University of Kentucky, and so hopefully they know who that is, and then then your conversation can flow from there. So it's just trying to point out and name connections between you and the other person, because that's what helps people be interested in you and want to get to know you better. And at some point, it's important to mention this, and this feels like an appropriate point, a comment about the process. So if you're feeling anxious as you listen to some of this advice about networking and navigating the convention, please know that anxiety is a healthy, normal reaction to thinking about having to do this stuff. And in some ways, going to the convention, trying to connect and make good use of your time is an anxiety-laced process. That's just how it is, because it feels important. You're wanting to connect with folks, you're wanting to get to know research, you're wanting to make a good use of your time, and there's this fear that, oh, maybe I'm going to miss out. There's some FOMO there, this fear of missing out that can happen. And so all of that is normal, and especially when it comes to networking, it gets people so anxious because I don't know how to do this, I don't do this so much, I'm out of practice, I don't know how I'm supposed to network specifically in this psychologist environment at APA. So you're going to feel anxious. When you're in networking mode, of course you're going to feel anxious. That is okay. It doesn't feel great, but that's okay, right? We want to take a mindfulness perspective and make room and be willing to sit with that anxiety, be willing to hold that anxiety tight and with a caring hand, and to try and connect with people even while feeling anxious. To try and honestly a lot of times fail or mess up or embarrass yourself sometimes. I continually, every single convention, have networking attempts and interactions where I come across as a hot mess. That's how human nature, especially if I'm feeling more anxious at that time. So the important point is allow yourself to feel anxious. Hold that anxiety gently, and still make efforts to connect and do the behaviors you need to do to set yourself up for success. Allow yourself to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes. You will get better and smoother with time. And it also gets easier with time because the first convention's the hardest. You built a very small network and it's real hard and you're out of practice. But then the second time, you remember some of that muscle memory for networking. You have some familiarity with how it goes, and there's a small group of people who will recognize you. Even if they don't remember your name, they'll recognize you, and they will ideally introduce you to the people that they know. So if you recognize each other at a social hour and you come up to them and say, hey, how's it going? and they happen to be standing next to a few of their colleagues or friends or their major professor, then they may be inclined to introduce you to those people. And so now you know those people. And so maybe you see one of those new people at a different function, and they say, oh, hey, you knew Mac. How's it going? And, oh, let me introduce you to this new person you don't yet know. So this is how your social networks spider webs out. It exponentially grows, because when you know 5 people, they can connect you with 15 more people. When you know 15 more people, they can connect you with 45 more people. So it just grows. And at some point, at about year 3 or 4, you're going to know, or at least recognize, at least half the faces if you're going to a specific division's events consistently. And of course, some are bigger than others. But honestly, when I go to Division 17 stuff, I feel really secure, because more often than not, I recognize at least half to 75% of the folks, at least the professors. Some of the newer students who've come in since I was a student, I won't recognize, of course, but I recognize most all of the professors. And that's a really nice feeling, right? To know, oh, here are these people I know and have rapport with and could catch up with. So yeah, anxiety is normal. Manage it. It will definitely pay off. So I think this concludes talking about the nitty-gritty process of connecting with folks at the convention. So up next is talking about the logistics in terms of funding your trip, the timing of when to come to the convention and go, transportation, lodging, food, dress, business cards, other preparation stuff that you need to know to save yourself money and your sanity when it comes to creating a good convention. Okay, in this final video, we're going to talk about the logistics of APA. So there's a lot of tips and tricks that I've learned from others and from trial and error over time that have helped me go to the convention much cheaper, make it much smoother, avoid the hassles that can be baked into this experience. So we'll talk about funding, the timing of going, transportation, lodging, food, dress, business cards, all that stuff. Let's start with funding. So there's a few different sources you might be able to get funding from. Sometimes you just got to pay out of pocket. And so if that's the case, you have to make a judgment call about whether spending the hundreds of dollars it will take typically to get and stay at APA is going to be worth the networking, the professional exposure, the being able to present your research and build your CV, whatever it is your goal is and what sort of outcomes you expect, you have to weigh the pro and con to see if you get a good return on investment, because it may not be the case. What can make this much easier is if you can get free money from places. And the best way to set yourself up for getting free money is to make sure you have a poster or a symposium presentation when you're one of the speakers at a symposium, when you're a first author on a poster or a talk in a symposium, or if you're the chair or facilitator of a round table or discussion circle or something like that. So, and the easiest type of thing to get accepted at APA is definitely a poster. So that's when you've got a study or a lit review or whatever it is, and you're summarizing in a 3-foot by 5-foot or a 4-foot by 6-foot big poster that gets printed at a professional printer, and you roll it up and you stick it in a tube and you bring it to APA to present during one of those hour-long poster sessions that's held in the big convention exhibition hall at the convention center. Because there's a ton more posters get accepted than talks at symposia. It's really hard, especially as a graduate student, to be a presenter as a part of a symposium unless, say, a faculty member brings you in or hooks you up with that. It's usually hard for you to initiate and create that, because you need to have a chair who agrees to kind of run the whole thing and find multiple people who can all do thematically consistent talks. It's a lot more difficult and complex to coordinate a symposium and being a part of that. I mean, sometimes as a student you might get lucky. If you've done some research and are known for something, you might get invited to be a part of a symposium, or you might see a call on one of the listservs you're on in October or September saying, hey, I want to chair a symposium on this topic. If you're interested and you're doing relevant research, send me an email and I'll select from those who email me a good crew of 3 to 5 folks who might be able to present papers as a part of the symposium. So if you get symposium stuff going, super great, but it's hard. Posters are much more realistic, particularly for graduate students. If you do a decent study and you already have data that you're able to preliminarily analyze, you're in a good place for creating a poster proposal and hopefully getting that accepted. So what happens is you've got kind of 2 waves of deadlines when it comes to programming. You've got the collaborative programming that happens across division that APA is really pushing, where they're trying to get people to propose to do talks and presentations and things that apply to people across multiple divisions that would be sponsored by multiple divisions, because they want folks that are more cross-cutting interest for folks generally. They want more people to be able to come to fewer events so that we're not spread too thin. And so that's mostly symposia stuff. And that, I believe, is due October 15 or sometime in October 15. Again, I don't know when you'll be listening to this, but check the APA website and the listservs for up-to-date information. But that collaborative programming deadline happens way earlier. It's like mid-semester. Whereas the traditional APA deadline for posters and talks and whatever for most divisions is going to be December 1. So most people, at least I think, maybe it was moved into November, but check the deadline. It's in November, December, and you're going to want to make sure to get in your proposal in for that poster or symposium talk or whatever it is before the deadline. So again, if you're doing poster, because that's the path of least resistance, then what's going to be required is like a 250 to 500 word abstract where you summarize what your poster would be on. And that's very few words. It's really easy to come up with an abstract, which is nice. You don't actually have to have the poster ready or anything. You don't have to work on that until June in preparation for an August presentation. But all you have to do is the project has to be far enough along that you can write up a sensible abstract for the proposal. And you say, this is what I'm going to talk about if I'm selected to present a poster. And so you want to ask people in your professional network for examples of successful poster proposals to APA. And so you can kind of see how they're worded. Some people are able to do lit reviews, and so they'll get a poster accepted to just summarize a body of literature in poster form. But most people, and maybe the stronger type of proposal, is an empirical project. Whether it's quantitative or qualitative, it's where you've collected some data and you're going to talk about what the data have to say about your hypotheses or research questions. And so proposals, so you want your project, ideally, it definitely needs to be conceptualized. Ideally, you've already started to collect data, and even stronger is that you've at least done preliminary analyses. They don't have to be final analyses, but you want to be able to report on some analyses based on the data you have. If you're still collecting data or you're about to start collecting data, then your proposal is going to be less strong because people are going to ask, they say they're going to collect this data, but the proof is in the pudding. I'd rather prioritize another project that I know has the data ready and that they already have pre-made results ready to talk about. I'm going to favor that other poster proposal. So that's why ideally you're going to report on some preliminary analyses and their implications in that poster proposal. But definitely posters are a way to go because you want to, and you might not be able to do this at first. You might be a second or a third author on a poster because you're helping someone else, and that's fine. But ideally, as soon as you can professionally, you want to start submitting proposals to present posters that are first author, where you're first author on them. The reason is if you get a poster proposal accepted that's first author, then it's nice because you will be able to get your convention registration fee waived, which is, I think, in the 80s or 90s for graduate students. And that's, it's a hefty amount of money, that $80 or $90. And so if you're a successful first author, they will waive that fee. That's part of the cool deal that graduate students get. And so that is your incentive for getting a poster accepted, because then you can waive that fee. And it's one less thing you got to pay for. It's one less thing you got to put some of that money you hopefully get from your program or university. You can save that money and apply it towards other things like meals and whatnot. So posters are definitely the way to go, and you can grow from there. Try and start doing first author posters as soon as you can. And ideally, you're submitting 2 first author proposals, so say 2 posters, because one may not be accepted. And every division is different in how rigorous or how much competition there is to get a poster accepted. And so you can kind of ask around and get a sense of if multiple divisions are appropriate for submitting your poster to, because you got to submit posters only to those divisions where they care about your topic, obviously, right? It's just like submitting papers to journals. They have to care about that topic in order to consider publishing it. So it's the same way with these divisions. But find out the divisions where you have a shot at getting your poster accepted, submit it, and you want to have at least 2 proposals in, because you either get them both and that's great, or one fails but the other one sticks, and then, whew, great, I can waive that conference registration fee. Whereas if you only submit one, you live or die in terms of that waiver by that one project. So ideally you can be on 2 different first author things every single time you're going to be going to the convention. And so that requires some pre-planning, but that's something you want to do. Another big reason why you want to be a presenter, and sometimes you don't even have to be first author, but it certainly helps, but your program, your department, your college, or your university, all of those entities, sometimes multiple entities, depends on your institution, some of them may offer travel funding to help defray the cost of traveling to the APA convention or other conferences. And sometimes one of the criteria is that you're presenting. You're likely to get funding. You're more likely to get funding if you're presenting, and you're more likely to get more funding than you otherwise would if you're presenting. So every institution is different. Sometimes they don't care. Sometimes you can just they don't care if you're attending or presenting, but a lot of them do. So it's good to get in the habit of being ready to present, of getting stuff accepted, because that strengthens your application for funding that you'll submit in the spring or summer prior to the APA convention. And again, talk with your professors, talk with graduate students, talk and talk and talk to figure out who gives travel funding at your institution. And not only do program, department, college, and university levels sometimes get funding, but certain APA divisions will fund students. They'll have student scholarships to attend. Some sections within a division will sponsor folks. I know that's the case for D17. APAGS gives out some scholarships. APA generally gives out some travel funding monies. So do your homework, do some Googling, look for ways that you can get funding not only from places in your institution, but also APA related stuff. So you know, put your nose to the grindstone and ferret out where funding is. There might even be funding from a professor's grant or private organizations or scholarship money or your fellowship. You know, explore all options, talk with people, figure out where you can get money. So those are some essential things you need to know about where can I get money to help defray. So that's talking about funding. And now let's talk about the timing of getting to the convention and departing the convention. So the convention officially is held Thursday all day, Friday all day, Saturday all day, and then Sunday until 12-ish. So it's a half day. So the standard is to fly in or drive in Wednesday afternoon or evening, then spend the night so that you can get up bright and early for early Thursday morning, first day of the convention stuff, and then to book your flight for the afternoon or evening of Sunday to depart after stuff happens in the morning, and you have a bit of time to transition out of there. However, there is what's called pre-convention programming that happens on Wednesday. So if you sign up for a half-day continuing ed workshop or a full-day workshop, or you're going to committee meetings or other things like that, you may have some professional obligations on that Wednesday, in which case you get there Wednesday morning or even Tuesday evening, pushing it back. Now, of course, as a poor graduate student, you are not going to want to spend more money on lodging than you have to. So getting there Wednesday night means you have one more night that you need to spend money on. Whereas if you got there Thursday morning, you might only need to be there Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night for a total of 4 days, 3 nights, which would be considerably cheaper. But here's the rub. When you learn that your presentation, well, so there's two camps. If you're not doing any presenting, you have flexibility about when you show up or depart. You could even come for just Friday and Saturday, especially if it's close by to your hometown. But most people want to get their money's worth, and so are there at least Thursday through Saturday, or maybe Thursday through Sunday. But if you're not having to present, or you're not required to be at any given thing, then you can come when you want. But for a lot of us, especially if you're taking the advice we talked about of getting a poster or something accepted where you're going to have to present, you must be there, otherwise it's a big faux pas professionally, then you're going to know if your stuff has been accepted usually by February. Although there is a Division 17 poster session that happens on Thursday where they ask for and do acceptances of poster proposals in the spring, around February-ish, I think. So that's an opportunity if you missed the December deadline for the regular division stuff. If you're a member of D17 counseling psych, that's something to keep in mind. But anywho, if you're presenting, you'll know that your stuff was or was not accepted, and if you had stuff that was accepted, you know that in February, but it's not until later in the semester, it's not until April or May-ish when you will know what specific day and time that you're going to be presenting, because their APA is still having to put that schedule together. And unfortunately, you're oftentimes going to prefer to book your plane tickets and your lodging before you know when you'll be presenting. So it creates this danger game where you can try and cut it close and say, you know what, I'm going to fly in Thursday morning, which means I could be to the convention by noon on Thursday, and that might work out great. But what if your poster ends up being a part of a session that's Thursday morning, and then you'd miss it, right? So you booked a flight that doesn't get you there early enough, and then that's embarrassing, right? So that's the risk. So you have to figure out your personal tolerance for taking risks. The same thing applies for taking a flight out Saturday night instead of Sunday. So what if you get assigned to present on Sunday morning, but you're leaving Saturday night? Or what if you book a flight out Sunday morning instead of Sunday afternoon, but you have to present Sunday morning? So that's what you can run into with that, but be mindful of that. So for me, I prefer to get there Wednesday evening, but not too late, because if you get there too late, then the hotel can give away your room, even if you try and call them in advance and say, hey, I'm going to be there late, hold on to it. When hotels are really packed, they may be tempted to give away your room because you haven't showed up, even if they made a note in your reservation. So you have to be mindful about getting to your hotel too late if you don't have roommates who have already checked in at a more reasonable hour. So be wary of those things and think about your timing of when you're coming and going. Transportation. So you're going to have, to drive or fly to get to the convention, and then it's your around the city transportation during the 4 days. As far as airline tickets, because usually folks are flying, sometimes they're carpooling, which can sometimes be cost effective if you get a bunch of people, but most people buy plane tickets, especially if they're getting funding from their university or whatnot. So when it comes to that, oftentimes the conventional wisdom is to try and buy your tickets 3 months in advance of whenever you're leaving for places. That tends to be a rule of thumb. But the thing is, with the American Psychological Association convention, there's these thousands and thousands of psychologists and students who are all streaming into a city for a very short amount of time. And so we really beef up the population of some of the cities that we visit for that short period of time. And so everybody is snapping up plane tickets for those specific days. Everybody across the country and everybody in your region is going to be looking for tickets, and that normally doesn't happen in daily life. Sorry about the noise. So normally, airlines are ready to take on the passenger load of people who normally do that flight path. They're not ready necessarily for a bunch of psychologists to want to come all to one city. That's not necessarily in their planning books. So what that means is that it creates this arms race. It's like trying to get an apartment in a very busy city where there's few apartments and a lot of people. It pushes the process earlier, right? So generally, I encourage people to try and reserve their buy their plane tickets on the earlier side. And specifically, I recommend using Kayak or another search aggregate site to look for the best price, and look for hacker fares and other stuff like that that can get you the best price at a reasonable time, and to purchase that earlier in the spring semester, way in advance, especially if you know how the prices are going to flow. So yeah, buying tickets early in advance, I definitely recommend it. Although sometimes, depending on how the funding at your university works, if you're getting reimbursed post hoc, then you can buy the tickets now and get reimbursed later. But if you're having to use a pro card or having to have the university admin person do the purchase for you, there may be some stipulations on how early you can do that. But anywho, you want to make sure that whenever you're flying in, it's going to get you there in time to get settled before you have to do convention stuff. And when it comes time to leave on, say, Sunday, you have to bear in mind that the airport security lines for that city are going to be crazy busy. There's going to be a gazillion psychologists waiting in the security line. And so that's when having something like the TSA pre-check is very nice. You pay $80 or so and you can go in the short line, and that lasts for 4 or so years if you can afford it and can do the hassle of going to a TSA location to get that. I highly recommend getting it. It'll pay off even if you travel only a few times a year. But if you don't have it, it means you're going to have to wait in a security line that could be an hour or 2 hours long. It just really depends on the time of day, because there's going to be this glut of psychologists leaving mid-morning, midday, and in the afternoon to fly out to a bunch of places who all have to go through that one city's security. What that means is that you cannot cut it close. You have to be ready to leave the convention center or your hotel or whatever super early with plenty of time to travel to the airport and then to get through security. You want to give yourself at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to get through security just for that. Sometimes it doesn't end up being an issue and you go through just fine and you're like, oh, I feel like a stupid person, I got here so early, but you just never know. And people have missed their flights and experienced a lot of stress because they didn't leave themselves enough buffer time. So bear that in mind. That's why I usually like flights that leave around 2-ish on the earliest side, because it gives me enough time if I have to go to a thing at 11 o'clock or whatever, that I can still get to the airport and go. And then also the time of your departing flight needs to be influenced by public transportation. So we can say a little bit about the local public transit. Usually, in most of these cities, you can get from the airport to the convention center and the sponsored hotel's location in the downtown pretty easily by public transportation, specifically by usually a tram or a train or a subway or something like that. So usually they have good public transportation that can get you there. So you plan in advance, okay, it's going to take me 10 minutes to go from airport to the convention area, it's going to take me 30 minutes, an hour, it just really depends. And you need to build that time into your Sunday departure. So if it's going to take travel time, you got to build that in to give yourself plenty of time to get to the airport well in advance so you can get through security, etc. And again, this is painfully obvious to a lot of you, but it's some stuff you just may not think about when you're looking to purchase plane tickets, but it's something that you need to account for. So usually trains and whatever are the best. Buses can be hit or miss. Taxis and Uber can be expensive, right? And so if you got deep pockets, fine, you have your personal transportation vehicle, although it may still be stuck in nasty traffic. It just depends on all those other psychologists taking taxis to get to the airport. But sometimes you can split a taxi and that makes the cost more acceptable, etc. So anywho, talked about airline flights, talked about ground transportation, and to that point, you want to make sure that ideally you can walk between where the ground transport, the public transport leaves you off, and where your home hotel is, where your lodging is. And again, as I mentioned before, you want to be in a hotel that's within walking distance of everything. And I will talk a little bit more about that right now. So yeah, let's talk about lodging. So Airbnb has changed this a little bit, where it's become a competitor to the hotels. So sometimes, especially if you got a group of people who are going to the convention who you're friendly with and would be comfortable rooming with, you can get a multi-bedroom or multi-bed Airbnb, and the price ends up being quite reasonable, or even more competitive than hotels. And sometimes the units can be a little cleaner depending on the hotel. So Airbnb, it's worth checking out. However, Airbnbs often aren't posted until a few months before. So like for this upcoming APA convention, I'm recording this in March, and a lot of the Airbnbs for August are not yet posted. So I wasn't able to get a good sense, and I wasn't comfortable just waiting to get a better sense. So Airbnbs are something to consider, but otherwise it's area hotels. Here are some factors that I think about that you may want to think about. First is cost. The APA sponsored hotels, and what APA asks you to do is say, hey, we've selected these 3 hotels to be our official hotels, and we also got some additional satellite hotels where we have special rates lined up. Sometimes those special rates for those hotels that APA has officially made deals with, sometimes those rates are good and competitive, and that works. But a lot of times I find that I can get a better deal if I don't wait to use the university, if I don't wait to use the APA registration and lodging reservation system, because they try and say, hey, use our system to register and also to book your hotel, which is understandable. But I've oftentimes been able to find better deals even after the APA discount when I'm searching on my own. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking at hotels. So you will have those official APA hotels, and then you'll get all the other hotels that are around it. So one thing you, of course, want to think about is price. It's better to be cheaper, especially when you're doing it on a budget. One thing that will help it be cheaper is if you can room with other people. So I've never roomed alone. That's expensive, and maybe you have to do it for life circumstance reasons, but it's better to have a roommate or multiple roommates. For graduate students, I recommend getting a room that has 2 queen beds or 2, sometimes double beds if you can, or full beds if you can swing that and you're kind of comfortable enough with your roommates. But it's best to put 4 people in a room so that 2 people can split one bed, 2 people can split the other bed, because that means the per night expense you're dividing by 4 rather than just splitting it between you and one other person. So when it's just 4 days and everybody's super tired and usually falling asleep right away because they're exhausted, and you're not spending really any time in the room except to recharge and brush your teeth and whatnot, it doesn't matter if you got 4 people to a room. The cost savings are well worth it. So that may be in the cards for you or not. I think that APAGs and sometimes student groups associated with certain divisions can facilitate helping students find other students to room with. But that is something you can consider, is bunk up so that you can really split the cost easily. One thing you have to remember, though, is if you're going to have to seek reimbursement, you have to make sure that the bill gets divided up in such a fashion that you get to pay only your portion with your credit card, and it's clear how much your credit card paid for, and that the balance is zeroed out on the bill. I mean, the people you're going to be sending your receipt to for reimbursement may have very specific rules for how the receipt has to look or be processed or whatever. So be mindful of that so that you don't get denied your money when it comes time to get reimbursed. So that's important. And so just make sure you're splitting up the bill in the proper way so that the paperwork reimbursement will work out on your end. What else? Other than a good bargain on the hotel, I think having free Wi-Fi is usually pretty important given how wired we are if you don't want to use your cellular, especially if it's out of country in Canada, in Toronto, for example, the convention will be there occasionally. That's when free Wi-Fi is really good so that you can avoid some roaming charges potentially. So free Wi-Fi in the room is helpful. Free breakfast is good if you do eat breakfast and you want to avoid an expense. Oftentimes, if they throw in a continental breakfast or a hot breakfast or whatever, like Drury Inn does, for example, that can be a cost saver unless you're willing to like bring some oatmeal to heat up in your microwave in the room or something like that, which is what I did when I was strapped for money. But those are nice perks that I think are nice, but what is even more important, this is probably tied for importance with price, is location. Specifically, walking distance to the convention center and to those 3 APA hotels where official and unofficial convention programming is going to be held. So what I like to do is I'd like to create a new Google map, a new personal Google map, and then start putting pins in the relevant locations. I put a pin in the convention center, the 3 hotels, and then I go searching for what hotel I will actually reserve for my lodging. And so I can plot walking time between the 3 hotels in the convention center and wherever I might rest my head at night. Because I'll tell you this, especially if you're wearing formal shoes that are not super comfortable for walking long distances, you want to be within 10 or 15 minutes of the convention center and those other places. You want to be able to walk in 10 to 15 minutes. The APA shuttles are hit and miss. Sometimes they work really well and they're there on time and there's plenty of them, and sometimes you're like, where the hell is the shuttle? I need to get to this next symposium or whatever, or I need to get home, and it ends up messing with your mojo. So the shuttles can really vary on how on point they are. So I prefer to trust my own 2 feet because I know how long they'll take me to walk somewhere. And so because of that, I also want to be close enough so that I can go back to the hotel and take a nap, or if I spill on my tie, I can change up my clothing, or I can go chat with someone at my hotel if I need to take a break. I can, after the day is done, go back to the hotel to freshen up before going out for the evening. If I forget something in my hotel room that I'll need for presenting, then I can go back there. I find that to be really helpful. It's just, I really like the security of being able to zip over to the hotel and then come back to the action. Whereas some people will save money by staying far out and then commuting in to the area every day. And that can work well if you don't mind schlepping all your stuff with you for the whole day and then only going back when it's comfortable. But I find that in terms of optimally making social plans and connecting with people, you got to be ready to be spontaneous and go to dinner here or there, or go to this evening thing here or there, and it's harder to just make it and be there and to catch people in the moment and catch opportunities if you're at a hotel 45 minutes away. So you're hanging out, you just finished dinner, you're not sure how evening plans are coming along, and then it's like, do I loiter around here, or do I commute back to my hotel for 45 minutes only to get a text from somebody saying, hey, we're going to do this thing at 9 p.m., can you come out? And then, you've taken off your shoes and you're lying on your bed and you're letting your bones rest, and you're like, oh, I don't want to travel 45 minutes back into the city. So that is the one downside of that. So when you're trying to serious network and stuff, it's better to be closer to the action. So really recommend that walking distance. And of course, another essential component is the quality of the hotel. So I'm usually looking for, like if it's on a 4-star system, I'm usually looking for something 3 stars or above. So kind of the equivalent of 3.0 or 3.5 and above on a 4.0 scale. Trying to find that optimal price point between low price, but I'm not going to get bed bugs, or the rooms are not going to be dirty or whatever. I don't care if the room is small. I'm not hanging out in my room. I'm just recharging there. It doesn't have to be this luxury thing for me necessarily. I'd rather save some money. So each of you will have your own kind of balance point between the lux of the room versus the price versus the location. But those are some of the things that I think about when judging what hotel is a good fit. In terms of food, if you're a poor graduate student, you may or may not be getting a per diem in terms of a fixed dollar amount to use to purchase food. But if you are getting a per diem, if you can eat on the cheap, then you get to save some of that money that you otherwise would spend on fancy, expensive restaurant meals during your time. So for me, when I was a graduate student, I tried to eat on the cheap and eat free whenever I could, so that some of that per diem money I could put towards savings or other expenses that I weren't able to get covered. And you'll have your own preference for that. So I would bring oatmeal that I could make in the microwave every morning, and that would be my breakfast, so I didn't have to go out and eat breakfast. That's what I did. You may, of course, not have to do that. APAGS, the grad student organization for APA, puts on a food for thought breakfast every morning of the convention, where you go and it's a nice continental breakfast, and you can eat some stuff and you listen to speakers and connect with folks. It's a good way to get a free meal as a poor graduate student and spend good time. There are also some other divisions and other folks who put on free food events that are worth trying to hear about and go to if you can. Even if you don't have an affiliation with the division, if they're open to other people who are maybe interested in just checking out the division, that's totally cool. Go, get fed, learn about the organization, and you might make some connections that made you happy you went. Other things, sometimes divisions or sections of divisions will host social hours that have food or drink, so that's nice to be able to get. Some of them don't have free food or drink. In the exhibit hall with all the exhibitors where they're hawking their products and services, sometimes they'll give out free cocktails or drinks or snacks or whatever, so if you keep your ears and eyes peeled and your inboxes peeled for those sorts of opportunities, you can get some free sustenance from that. It's possible that if you connect with professors at the convention, certain professors like to take people out for lunch or dinner and to pay for the student. So depending on the mentor or the professor, that may or may not happen for you. It's really nice when it does. Kind of a paying it forward sort of thing. I know in my position as a professor now, I'm increasingly in that spot where I can pay for others' meals, and it feels good because that was done for me. It was helpful when you're a graduate student with not a lot of money. So yeah, those can be some sources of free food, but otherwise, outside of the free stuff, and you can always, get Subway, or you can buy some stuff at the local grocery store to make sandwiches or whatever. If you need to do it cheap and frugal, there are ways. Make sure your hotel room has a mini fridge that can keep stuff cool in, or leftovers cool in to eat a quick meal. You can bring leftovers to the convention the next day for a quick lunch. Bring a Tupperware or some Ziplocs from home with some snacks or some nuts or berries or energy bars or stuff that will travel well. You don't have to spend your money on pricey stuff. You can bring food from home and be frugal about it if you so choose. But you do want to make sure you leave time in your schedule to eat, as I mentioned before, because if you burn out and you crash because you haven't been feeding and hydrating yourself, that's not good because you can't perform your best then. Whew, that's food. All right, getting real close. Dress code. The minimum dress code is generally business casual, so not jeans or shorts and not t-shirts. So at least a nice looking polo and dress pants or khakis of some kind, or a nice blouse and a nice skirt or whatever it is that you like to wear. So you want to kind of be a step up from casual, because people may interpret your casual dress as a lack of professionalism, even if that's not true. It's unfair. It's also wrapped up in social class and socioeconomic status in terms of who has money to buy expensive, fancy clothes, and what does that mean about what we value. So there's that whole critique that's possible there, but you need to know if you come dressed in casual dress, or what people attribute to casual dress, it could end up hurting your ability to connect with folks. And if you're really trying to impress people, you want to show up in business formal attire. A suit coat, suit pants, dress shirt, nicer stuff. And you can kick it up a notch to wearing ties and other things like that if you want. If you're going to present, when you're going to present, I recommend absolutely going business formal. So when I present, it's a suit and tie, absolutely. And I recommend a similar style for you. Thursday can be a little bit looser because people are coming, but still pretty formal. Sunday is where you start, people get lazy. So you'll see some jeans on Sunday. So, and I'm a professor at this point, and so there's less pressure on me to always be dressing super nice all the time because I have a job and I'm not looking towards the next step. I like to wear jeans and a nice polo or dress shirt on Sunday. I can do that. When I was still a student, I still wore dress pants on Sunday because you just never know who you're going to run into. But people do get a little looser on Sunday. You'll see folks in the audience in jeans and in their comfortable travel clothes that they'll use when they depart straight to the airport. And a lot of times people will check out of their hotel and they'll either leave their luggage behind the desk at the hotel and come pick it up later, or they'll wheel their luggage to the convention center or wherever the stuff is happening, and they will just keep it in the back of the room. They'll keep their luggage in the back of the room as they're attending events at APA. That's totally cool to do. You just wheel it around with you as you go to those last few things. Absolutely fine to do. So that's some stuff about dress. I should mention that sensible footwear is really important. If you can find good-looking but comfortable shoes, that's really good because you're going to do so much walking and standing. It's nuts. Your feet are going to be so sore by the end of it. I actually have a pair of black sneakers that, because I'm so serious about self-care, I wear these black sneakers the whole 4 days with a suit. I mean, they're black, and so people, when they're not looking carefully, it kind of looks like dress shoes from a distance. But it's just so important to me that, especially since I can't do a lot of sitting because of my back, I need to do a lot of standing to stay comfortable, so it's important that I'm wearing my sneakers with my orthotics, my custom orthotics in there, so I'm not in pain. So that's something you can consider, though, of course, some people will judge you by your shoes, and so if you're trying to impress folks, dress shoes are where it's at. But should mention that caveat.